Hello, everyone. Dr. Mad here. Let's get mad about an inspector calls. So we are going through Act 3, and we had got to this point here. So let's listen to a bit more of the audio, and then we'll go through it as usual.
You're the one I blame for this, Eric.
I'll bet I am.
You don't realise yet all you've done. There'll be a public scandal.
I don't care now.
You don't seem to care about anything. But I care. I was almost certain for a knighthood in the next honours list.
For God's sake! What does it matter now whether they give you a knighthood or not?
It doesn't matter to you. Apparently nothing matters to you. But it may interest you to know that until every penny of that money you stole is repaid, you'll work for nothing. And there's going to be no more of this drinking round the town and picking up women in the palace bar.
I should think not. Eric, I'm absolutely ashamed of you. I don't blame you. But don't forget, I'm ashamed of you as well.
Now,
yes, both of you.
Drop that. There's every excuse for what your mother and I did. It turned out unfortunately, that's all.
That's all.
Oh, well, what have you got to say?
I don't know where to begin.
Then don't.
I know I behaved badly and I'm ashamed of it. But now you're beginning all over again to pretend that nothing much has happened.
Nothing much has happened. Haven't I said there'll be a public scandal, and who will suffer from that more than I will?
That's not what I'm talking about. You don't seem to have learnt anything.
You're wrong there. I've learned plenty tonight. Oh, when I think of what I was feeling when the five of us sat down to dinner tonight.
Yes. And you remember what you said to Gerald and me after dinner, when you were feeling so pleased with yourself? You told us that a man has to make his own way, look after himself and mind his own business, and that we weren't to take any notice of these cranks who tell us that everybody has to look after everybody else. Do you remember? And then one of those cranks walked in, the inspector. I notice you didn't tell him that it's every man for himself.
Is that when the inspector came, just after Father had said that?
What of it?
It's strange. It doesn't much matter now, of course. But was he really a police inspector?
If he wasn't, it matters a devil of a lot. Makes all the difference.
No, it doesn't.
Oh, don't talk rubbish. Of course it does.
Well, it doesn't to me, and it oughtn't to you either.
Don't be childish.
It's you two who are being childish, trying not to face the facts.
I won't have that sort of talk. Any more of that and you leave this room.
That'll be terrible for her, won't it?
Don't you see? If all that's come out tonight is true, then it doesn't much matter who it was who made us confess. And it was true, wasn't it? Father turned the girl out of one job, and I had her turned out of another. Gerald kept her, at a time when he was supposed to be too busy to see me. Eric, well, we know what Eric did. And Mother hardened her heart and gave her the final push that finished her. That's what's important, not whether a man is a police inspector or not.
He was...
That's a good point to stop. So let's just go back to where we were. And you can pause the video and just read through this and the whole page. The main thing here to notice is that Mr. Burling, all he's still concerned about is this public scandal. Still no real thoughts of Eva Smith, despite what he said earlier about paying thousands, going on about his honours list, and in fact, even his own son now points that out to him. And so again, you can pause the video and read through these lines properly. And Burling just having a go at his son and the fact that they're both ashamed. But Eric says he's also ashamed, and talking like this to your parents back then would have been a bit unusual. But Burling, Mr. and Mrs. Burling, still insisting that what they did was, there was nothing wrong with it as such, it just turned out wrong. So let's go to the next page now. So this, you can just pause the video and read through it. Nothing much to analyze as such. And he's still going on about his public scandal. And the main point here being that Sheila making the point that Mr. and Mrs. Burling, the parents, still don't seem to have learnt anything. And but this last few lines here are important. So Eric reminding his father, turning his words back on himself about how a man has to make his own way, look after himself and mind his own business and not take any notice of those cranks. So crank means like a crazy person, but that he didn't stand up to the police inspector. And here, this page is important in the sense that this is the first hint about whether the inspector was a real inspector or not. Okay, so you can pause the video and just read through those lines. And the same thing here. I mean, here again, Priestley uses Sheila to sum up what's happened so far, but we don't need to analyze this page too much. So let's just carry on. In fact, that's where we left off. So let's now listen to a bit more audio.
Was our police inspector all right?
That's what I mean. But I have an idea, and I had it all along vaguely, that there was something curious about him. He never seemed like an ordinary police inspector.
You're right. Yeah, I felt it too.
Well, I must say his manner was extraordinary. So rude and assertive.
Look at the way he talked to me, telling me to shut up. He must have known I was an ex-Lord Mayor and a magistrate and so forth. Besides, the way he talked, I mean, they don't talk like that. I've had dealings with dozens of them.
But it doesn't make any real difference.
Oh, of course it does.
No, Sheila's right. It doesn't.
That's comic coming from you. You're the one it makes most difference to. You've confessed to theft, and now he knows all about it, and he can bring it out at the inquest, and, if necessary, carry it to court. He can't do anything to your mother and Sheila and me, except perhaps make us look a bit ashamed of ourselves in public. But as for you, he can ruin you.
We hardly ever told him anything he didn't know. Did you notice that?
Oh, that's nothing. He had a bit of information left by the girl and made a few smart guesses. But the fact remains that if we hadn't talked so much, he'd have had little to go on. Yeah, and why you all had to go letting everything come out like that beats me.
It's all right talking like that now, but he made us confess.
He certainly didn't make me confess, as you call it. I told him quite plainly that I thought I had done no more than my duty.
Oh, Mother!
The fact is, you allowed yourselves to be bluffed. That fellow was prejudiced from the start, probably some sort of crank, and you let him bluff you into talking about your private affairs. You ought to have stood up to him.
I didn't notice you standing up to him.
No, because by that time, you'd admitted you'd been taking money. What chance had I after that? I was a fool not to have insisted upon seeing him alone.
Oh, that wouldn't have worked.
Of course it wouldn't.
Really, from the way you children talk, you might be wanting to help him instead of us. Now, just be quiet, so that your father can decide what we ought to do.
Yes. We'll have to get to work quickly. How's this?
Okay, that's a good point to stop. So let's just go back to this page here. So the main point on this page is this whole discussion about whether the inspector was a real police inspector or not, but also these lines are interesting. It's just, again, Mr. Burling going on about being the ex-Lord Mayor and magistrate and how people don't normally talk to him like that. So you can pause the video and read through these lines, but we'll move on to the next page. This page also we can fairly kind of quickly skim through. Now, just this line here, he had a bit of information left by the girl. What is he referring to there? He's talking about the diary. Okay, so yeah, we can skip through this page here. The whole point about whether the police inspector is real or not that's not really relevant to the play in terms of GCSE analysis, in terms of analyzing the themes of responsibility, socialism and capitalism, class structure. That is just something that Priestley has put into this play to make it more entertaining. Remember, it's basically meant to be a mystery story, okay? So, and that's the whole point of stories, of plays and novels, as opposed to, let's say, articles or non-fiction books or newspaper articles, that stories do their work through entertaining. Okay, so that's the important point to remember here. So you can't talk about this thing about whether the police inspector is real or not, but don't spend too much time on that. Okay, no more than 2 or 3 sentences at most. And there's various theories about either he's a ghost or he's their conscience. It's up to you to think about it and come up with your own ideas. But like I say, don't waste too much time on that. And yeah, so this page again, you can just read through, but just this thing here to point out Berling, again, using this word crank and socialist in the same sentence. So basically, from his point of view, if you're a socialist, you're a crank, you're crazy to talk about looking after each other and other people. According to him, it's all about yourself and maybe your family. Okay, let's move on. So actually, this is where we stopped. So let's listen to a bit more audio.
Had I better go?
Edna will go. I asked her to wait up to make us some tea.
It might be Gerald coming back.
Oh, Gerald? Of course, yeah, I'd forgotten about him.
Mr. Croft.
I hope you don't mind my coming back.
Of course not, Gerald. All right, Edna. Close the door.
Yes, ma'am.
When did that inspector go?
Only a few minutes ago. He put us all through it.
Now, we needn't bother Gerald with all that stuff.
He might as well know. We're all in it, Gerald, up to the neck. It got worse after you left.
How did he behave?
In a very peculiar and suspicious manner.
He was frightening.
The way he spoke to Mr. Burling and me was quite extraordinary.
If you ask me, he wasn't a police inspector.
You're right.
What?
That man was not a police inspector.
Are you certain?
Almost certain. I met a police sergeant I know down the road. I asked him about this Inspector Gould and described the chap carefully to him. He swore there wasn't any Inspector Gould or anybody like him on the force here.
But you didn't tell him...
No. I said I'd been having an argument with someone. But the point is, this sergeant was dead certain they hadn't any inspector at all like the chap who came here.
A fake.
Didn't I tell you? Didn't I say I couldn't imagine a real police inspector talking to us like that?
We've been had.
I'm going to make certain of this.
What are you doing?
Bringing up the Chief Constable, Colonel Roberts. Brumley 8752.
Careful what you say, dear.
Of course. Colonel Roberts, please. Mr. Arthur Burling here. You know, Gerald, I had my suspicions all along. Oh, Roberts, Burling here. Sorry to ring you up so late, but can you tell me if an Inspector Gould has joined your staff lately? Gould. Goole. A new man. About 5 feet 10 inches, dark hair, clean shaven. I see. Yes. Well, no, that settles it. No, just a little argument we were having here. Good night, Colonel.
Well, dear?
What did he say?
There's no Inspector Gould on the force here. As you say, Gerald, we've been had.
I felt it all the time.
This makes a difference, you know. In fact, it makes all the difference.
Of course.
I suppose we're all nice people now.
Sheila, if you've nothing more sensible to say than that, you'd better keep quiet.
Oh, she's right, though.
And you'd better keep quiet anyhow. If that had been a police inspector and he'd heard you confess...
Arthur, careful.
Yes.
You see, Gerald, you haven't to know the rest of our crimes and idiocies.
That's all right. I don't want to. Well, sir, what do you make of this business now? Was it a hoax?
Of course, somebody put that fellow up to coming here and hoaxing us. There are people in this town who dislike me enough to do that. We ought to have seen through it from the first. In the ordinary way, I believe I would have done. But coming like that, bang on top of our little celebration, just when we were all feeling so pleased with ourselves, well, actually, it took me by surprise.
I wish I'd been here when that man first arrived. I'd have asked him a few questions before I allowed him to ask us any.
It's all right saying that now.
I was the only one of you who didn't give in to him.
Oh.
And now I say we must discuss this business quietly and sensibly and decide if there's anything to be done about it.
You're absolutely right, my dear. Already we've discovered one important fact, that fellow was a fraud. But we found him out, and all we have to do is keep our heads. Now it's our turn.
Our turn? To do what?
To behave sensibly.
What's the use of talking about behaving sensibly? You're beginning to pretend now that nothing's really happened at all. But this girl's still dead, isn't she?
And that's what they don't seem to understand.
Whoever that chap was, the fact remains that I did what I did. And Mother did what she did. And the rest of you did what you did to her. It's still the same rotten story, whether it's been told to a police inspector or to somebody else. According
That's a good point to stop, because the audio version is quite different to the written version at this point. It's getting quite confusing, isn't it? So let's just go back and make sure we know where we are. So this is where we were when the bell rings. And this page is fairly straightforward. It's just Gerald coming back. So you can pause the video and read the lines yourselves. And let's move to this page here. And yeah, so again, just pause the video, read through these lines. Nothing much to analyze there. And let's move to this page now. So basically the main point here being that Gerald has found out that Gould was not a real police officer, because he met a police sergeant and asked them. So let's move on. And again, this page, I would just pause the video and read through those lines. By Jingo is just it's just a phrase. It does have an origin, but I'm not going to go through it here. You can look it up if you want, but it's not relevant to the play. And main thing is here that Berling is going to ring up the Chief Constable, Colonel Roberts, because obviously Mr. Berling does know everybody. And you can pause the video and just read through that. That's not really very relevant in terms of analysis. The only line to be aware of here is this one. I suppose we're all nice people now. So the fact is that regardless of whether Inspector Gould is a real police inspector or not, they have done what they've done. That hasn't changed. And yet Mr. and Mrs. Berling and Gerald, they suddenly start to behave as though the fact that Gould is not a real police inspector suddenly means that they haven't done anything wrong. But that hasn't changed. They did those things. They admitted those things. Okay, so let's move on to the next page. And then here, again, we can skip most of this, but just to note that Eric is taking Sheila's side. And the other thing to notice here is how Mrs. Berling keeps warning Arthur Berling to be careful of what he says. They don't want Gerald to know these things, even though they already know quite bad things about Gerald. And also here, this line, we tend to skip through this line, but there are people in this town who dislike me enough to do that. Just a throwaway line. So here we get a hint that Mr. Berling is not as popular as he likes to think, because up to this point, and generally speaking, he wouldn't normally say this. Okay, he would normally pretend that everybody loves him, everybody respects him and looks up to him. Maybe not loves him, but kind of likes him and respects him. Well, notice here, Sheila, she does hint at their crimes and idiocies. So idiocy means stupid, idiotic things that you've done. So you would think she'd be the one who wants to be more careful because she was engaged to him. Anyway, so let's move on to the next page. And here we can just skip through this page as well, but just noticing in terms of character analysis, Mrs. Burling saying, oh, if she had been the first one, she would have controlled him better, stood up to him better. So there's hints throughout that Mrs. Burling is actually the stronger character, and obviously we know she's higher class than her husband. Okay, so moving on to the next page. And this page as well, we can fairly quickly skip through, but you might want to just pause the video and read the lines. So main thing here, just to notice the interaction between the characters, and obviously that was more clear in the actual play, in the audio version, even though the audio is different to the written, and so that makes it a bit confusing. That's okay. We're just using that as a challenge to make sure that we're thinking and focusing. Okay, so let's move on to the next page. In fact, this is where we stop. So we're kind of here. So let's just listen to a bit more audio.
Oh, Gerald, you might as well know I stole some money.
Eric!
But the money's not the important thing. It's what happened to the girl and what we all did to her that matters.
Eric's right. And it's the best thing any one of us has said tonight. And it makes me feel a bit less ashamed of us. You're just beginning to pretend all over again.
For God's sake.
Arthur!
Well, they're so damned exasperating. They just won't try to understand our position or to see the difference between a lot of stuff like this coming out in private and a downright public scandal.
And I say the girl's dead and we all helped to kill her, and that's what matters.
Eric, either stop shouting or get out. Some fathers I know would have kicked you out of the house anyhow by this time. So hold your tongue if you want to stay here.
I don't give a damn now whether I stay or not.
You'll stay long enough to pay back that money you stole.
But that won't bring Eva Smith back to life, will it?
And it doesn't alter the fact that we all helped to kill her.
But is it a fact?
I suppose you're going to prove now you didn't spend last summer keeping this girl instead of seeing me, eh?
I did keep a girl last summer, I've admitted it. And I'm sorry, Sheila.
Well, I must admit you came out of this better than the rest of us. The inspector said that.
He wasn't an inspector.
He inspected us all right. And don't let's start dodging and pretending now. Between us, we drove that girl to commit suicide.
Who says so? There's no more real evidence we did than there was that chap was a police inspector.
Of course there is.
No, look at it. A man comes here pretending to be a police officer. It's a hoax of some kind. Now, what does he do? Very artfully, working on bits of information he's picked up here and there, he bluffs us into confessing that we've all been mixed up in this girl's life in one way or another.
And so we have.
Okay, let's just stop there for a minute and let's just go back. So this is where we were. And the important point here is how there's now a clear divide between Mr. and Mrs. Burling and Gerald on the one hand and Sheila and Eric on the other. So this is Eric saying that the girl's still dead and Sheila agreeing with him, and then his long speech. And well, you can pause the video and read through here and notice he doesn't mind confessing to Gerald. So notice the difference between Eric and Sheila. They're more open to things coming out, whereas Mr. and Mrs. Burling, their absolute nightmare is for anything to come out in public. Okay, and he's saying, yeah, the money's not that important. It's what we have did to the girl. They not killed her literally, directly, but indirectly killed this girl. And so again, Sheila and Eric now clearly coming on one side. Okay, so then let's move on to the next page here. And yeah, so this page you can pause and read carefully. So yeah, this is what I was saying earlier about he's happy, sort of happy for things to come out in private, but not in public. But Eric's just concerned about the girl. And so same, yes, this is just kind of the same thing here. And Berling here saying you're gonna give back the money you stole. And Sheila saying, well, that won't bring Eva Smith back to life. And Eric, that it won't change the fact that we all helped to kill her. Okay, and then let's Go to the next page. And here now the important thing is that Gerald starting to work out a story to show that actually the inspector didn't prove anything. So you should pause the video and just read through these lines. And this is the important lines here where he's trying to prove that what the inspector said wasn't true. So this is where we stopped. And you can read through these lines here. So their main thing being that, oh, how do we know it's the same girl? And this links back to why the inspector didn't show the photograph to anybody or only showed one person at a time. But again, this is just Priestley making the story entertaining, making the audience think, so that it doesn't just become a direct kind of like an essay on morality. That it's education, that it's entertaining as well as educational. So we won't listen to any more audio in this version. We'll carry on in the next video, but just what we can talk about here is the position of Gerald. He's interesting because age-wise, he's in the middle. So we've got Mr. and Mrs. Burling older, Erica Sheila younger, Gerald in the middle, but he sides more with the older people. Why do you think that is? Pause the video, think about it, and then I'm going to give you my ideas. So what I think is because he's upper class. Okay, so for him, his class makes more of an effect on him than his age. That's why he tends towards the older Burlings rather than the younger ones because he is closer to them. He's like maybe 5, 10 years older than them, whereas the Burlings are maybe 20 years older. Okay, so that's all I'll say about Gerald at this point. So we'll carry on with Act 3 in the next video. So I'll just end with this as always. Please, if you found this video useful, please subscribe and tell all your friends. And the next video should be the final video for Act 3. So I'll see you then.